Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Digital Nomad World weekly series. I'm Becky, and I'll be your host. And today we're going to be talking with Weh'yee Barkon about building a network for remote workers in Africa. Weh'yee, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Becky. It's nice to be here.
It's really nice to have you. I'm so excited to get deeper into this topic because it's something I admit that I don't know much about, and I hope that you can shed a lot of light on this for people that are curious.
For sure, yeah, you're not alone. I think the African continent in general, but especially in the context of remote work, is pretty unknown. So that's part of the reason why I'm here is to, help shed light on this part of the world and help to raise awareness about what we're trying to build here.
That's great. So, first, I'd love to hear how you got started on this journey. How did you start your remote work journey? And can you tell us about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of a long story. So I don't know if I'll just give you the full version, but I'll try to do an abbreviated version. My background is actually in early stage startups, technology companies, but I've always worked on the business side of those organizations. So business development, sales, customer success, support, anything that's non-technical is really an area where I can kind of help and really get involved with early stage founders and helping them to ideate and build their businesses. So that's my professional background. I worked in those contexts in New York City and San Francisco and Los Angeles. And so these are kind of like obviously major markets for technology companies and startups. I was doing that for a number of years in the US full time. And my most recent position before going remote was actually based in the Bay Area in San Francisco. But the role required me to travel a lot. So I was traveling from all over the country, like you name it, Utah, Atlanta, New York, different parts of Florida, obviously California, back and forth between Los Angeles, Oregon, a couple times Seattle, even Vancouver. So it was just a lot of traveling and a lot of movement. And anyone who's kind of worked in that environment or context, and they know it's stressful, but then you have the added stress of the fact that this is an early stage startup. So you're trying to figure everything out. It's very early. You're ideating, you're changing business models sometimes. And so after doing that for about 3 years, I was really feeling the pressure and basically exhausted. I was completely burnt out. And I think as any young person does, I bought a one-way ticket to Morocco. So that's a joke if you're listening to this, but I think most people don't do something that drastic. But for me, it was the right time and window where I really had a choice to make. Either I was going to continue this path, kind of continue climbing the corporate ladder, or I was going to do something in my heart that I knew I always wanted to do at some point, which was kind of take off and explore the world. So me purchasing that ticket really was how the journey of remote work started for me and traveling the world and being a digital nomad.
Wow. Okay. So I have to ask that one-way ticket to Morocco. Had you quit your job at that point? Did you have any job when you did that, or was that just shifting to remote work?
So yeah, so when I bought the ticket, I still had the job, but when I bought the ticket, I knew that originally it was supposed to be like a 2 week vacation, but as time went on, the months passed, I realized actually I think I want to make this a much longer thing. So I bought the ticket saying like I'll figure out the return ticket later. But eventually it just kind of like bled into actually I think I want to quit my job. So I purchased that ticket and then a couple months later I realized actually I want to make this a longer trip, and I kind of spoke with my job and let them know that I'd be leaving in the next few months.
Wow. Okay. So you land in Morocco and you eventually quit your job, like you said. But I have to ask, like, what is the current state of remote work in Africa itself? Like, how is Morocco doing with it? Are there like certain countries that are much more involved with the movement?
Yeah, well, I will say this. I mean, so yeah, I quit my job. And so when I landed in Morocco originally, it wasn't about work per se. It was more just kind of backpacking, traveling. The work part came later as I was yeah, as I ran out of money. So when I ran out of money, it was like, okay, yeah, like I need to work, I need to find a job. And that's where I started actively working to the point where I am now. living and working full time on the continent. But when I originally went, wasn't necessarily there for work, which ironically also allowed me to see it allowed me more room to experiment, if I can say, right? So, for example, when I was in Morocco, I even went to the desert and I lived in the desert, the Sahara Desert for like a month, and surprisingly, like really great connection. We had Wi-Fi and 4G. There's certain spots obviously that aren't that good, but that's something that I wouldn't have tried if I had to have to work, right? Like if I had a job, I wouldn't take the risk of going to the desert. So it allowed me some flexibility and allowed me to kind of travel around to different places. But I will say that there are certain countries for sure that in general, it's not so much that they're with the movement, it's more so that they're just more uh, better prepared and set up to work remotely, more developed. So in this part of the world, you do have to, yeah, you have to make sure that you're in a space and a country that is developed enough to be able to support yeah, just modern life and all things that come along with that. So internet, electricity, also the amenities like supermarkets and healthcare and stuff like that. So there are definitely some places that are more prepared for something like that, and others that are a bit less. Off the top of my mind, I would say Cape Verde, which is really cool place. They're probably the most marketable in that sense, because they are like very much into the digital nomad, work remotely, remote work visa type. The government is on board with that, which in a lot of African countries, it's not even on the radar. So Cape Verde comes to mind as a top destination. Other than that, I think a lot of the countries that also do very well with tourism would make sense to likewise do well in facilitating remote work, even if the government is not actively promoting that. And so Morocco, of course, is a very popular tourist destination. I would say Tanzania, Kenya as well. Kigali, Rwanda is an excellent place. They actually have a really big co-working space that's like specifically geared for people to be able to work remotely. That's one of my favorite places to work remotely here on the continent. And of course, I'm based in Senegal, and normally that is a great destination. But recently, there's been some issues politically that have led to some internet cuts and things like that. So you do need to do your research and kind of be prepared and understanding the context around the country you plan on visiting.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I imagine, as you said, there's a lot of variety and sometimes sporadic electricity or internet, and yeah, it could be changing frequently. So definitely doing the research is more important than a lot of the places that you're going to go. Are you currently in Senegal?
Yes, I'm in Senegal. So I'm actually normally I would be doing this call in Dakar, the capital, but right now I'm about 3.5, 4 hours south in this place called Palmerain. So it's like right by the beach. I wanted to get away from the city and kind of take a small vacation for myself, a workcation.
I mean, it's incredible. Your connection is clearer than a lot of people I've called in places where you would think there'd be this amazing internet. So I'm really impressed with the connection that you're
Yeah,
getting in that remote
yeah,
place.
yeah. I mean, the country is completely wired. Senegal is great. 4G everywhere. Fiber optic. It's in Dakar. It's especially fast. The Wi-Fi in Dakar is actually faster than what I get back home in the U.S. Obviously, you do have to pay for it, so it is a bit more expensive, but it's definitely worth it, especially if you're doing, Zoom calls with, tens of potentially hundreds of people, then you really do need that type of connection. But yeah, world-class connection. I think you know how it is with the media. Africa can kind of get that reputation of electrical cuts, and it's not as wired or as developed. And don't get me wrong, those types of things do happen, but you'd be surprised just how connected the continent is, especially if you do your research and kind of plan accordingly to make sure you're in places that are well connected.
Yeah, I actually recently, in last December, I went to Ghana and I booked an Airbnb. Actually, my friends booked it, but we didn't maybe look at the research about supermarkets or things that were close to us. So we could
Yeah.
get taxis, but it turned out it was not walkable where we were. And I think maybe that's
Okay.
also an important point when you're thinking of going, is like going to these places, like you mentioned Kigali, Rwanda, looking for places that are close to a co-working space. So it's a little easier, it feels safer to get there when you're first
Yeah.
starting out
Yeah.
on the continent.
I would say I would say so. I mean, it really depends on your kind of your risk tolerance. So, there's a full spectrum. Some people who just like to jump in and figure it out as they go along, and that's totally cool. And then there's other people who are just naturally more hesitant, especially when you talk about coming to Africa. It is very different than the Western world, and so definitely you have to know yourself and kind of where you are on that spectrum. And yeah, plan accordingly, because if you are a little bit more reserved, you definitely probably will want to find a setup that is for sure yeah, safer in some regards, in some aspects for sure. How did you find Ghana? How was that experience for you?
Ghana was like the people there are so friendly, and I could tell, especially in the capital, Accra, there's a lot of places that are really starting to develop. I did make the mistake. I will say that I was a little bit too bold. I think I went out with a female friend, and we both
Okay.
did not look local. And it was a big
Okay.
concert. It was a big concert, so we ended up getting robbed. But it
Really?
was looking back, there are definitely safety measures I would have taken, or maybe avoided some, like going out at night, in such a crowded place. And,
Wow.
I think some of it
Was
was
it like
me not being aware. So
yeah, was it like a pickpocket type thing, or was it like an actual
it was an
strong arm
actual
robbery?
strong, it was a
Oh
strong
wow.
armed, but there were no weapons that we saw. But
Wow.
I think there may have been a small weapon that got the purse off of us pretty quickly. But we physically were not harmed. But it was
Okay.
quite scary. But I would just say, and like a lot of places around the world, night is very different than day, especially if you're a woman. So be
Yeah.
very careful. But the people were amazing, and the hospitality that we experienced
Yeah.
was some of the best I've ever had. So
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
really nice.
That's unfortunate. Yeah, I would say like in my experience, like I haven't had anything crazy, but I do think of course you hear stories, and I've had things happen to other people. And it does go back to kind of like that awareness, and like you said, taking extra care. And I think especially for your Western listeners who are listening to this right now, I think for me one of the biggest things was understanding that this is not the United States, or this is not whatever just insert your favorite Western country wherever you're listening from. And as a result, you do have to adopt a different way of being. Sometimes you can't just go out at night as you would normally, or in the same way that you would. So
Yeah, I think for anyone watching too, that is a woman who's been in some countries like in South America or places that have a reputation for some danger, it's the same precautions you would take there. So just to put that out there early on. But I
yeah,
did want to ask you, so I know that once you got there, once you started working in Africa, how did you get inspired to start building a job board for Africans and advocating for remote work?
yeah. Yeah. So that also is like a really long story, but the long story short is, I'm an entrepreneur by nature, so I do have some investments in businesses here on the ground on the continent. And then likewise, I've always, my background is in tech, so I've always had one foot in the tech world and like trying to build things online. And one of the things that I noticed, in anyone who comes here or has been here will notice, is that there there is a gap when it comes to tech jobs, online work, remote work, or just jobs in general, even for people, young people here in Africa. And so there's a lot of people who've gone to school, they studied, and they have their degrees, and they're ready to work, and there's no work. And so what happens is you see what I call forced entrepreneurship, where there's people who are they wouldn't be trying to create some sort of business or sell some product or service, but because of the lack of available opportunities and jobs, they are forced into the situation where they're having to do whatever they can to make money, even if it's much lower than uh, what they normally would go for, right? So you'll see people selling all types of things on the street or basically trying to hustle to make money. And I saw that as a huge problem. And looking at my background and the things that I've worked on in the past, I understood also that it's an opportunity and that I think I'm uniquely positioned and my team is uniquely positioned to be able to try to help fix for a lot of the continent. And I think remote work is great for a lot of different things, but specifically it opens up the window of opportunity for people whose window is otherwise limited. And so that is the real concept behind what we're trying to develop and build. It's about helping to open up opportunity for people who don't necessarily always have a lot of opportunity. So giving people access to jobs, not just in their local community or the city that they live in, but the entire world. Specifically the African continent, but eventually the vision is much larger to the point where people will be able to work at any company anywhere in the world right here from Africa. So that's the vision and the quick story behind it. And yeah, it's we're working really hard to bring that product to market and to try to help people here on the continent.
How is this starting? Is your idea to kind of go through a website where people can get on and look at the jobs available, and also have like people who are looking for workers to post the jobs as well?
Yes, so it's a platform where we kind of connect both sides. Again, starting with exclusively the continent. So looking at African startups and African companies who are looking for the continent's top talent. So we're focusing on the top 1%. It's a private invite only job board. So you do have to be invited and there is a pretty thorough vetting process. And the reason we're doing that is because we know that it is equally challenging for companies to be able to vet and distinguish between like who's actually going to be a good fit and who isn't. And so in that sense, we don't want to just replicate, because there are some job boards out there. We don't just want to replicate what already exists, but we want to create a more premium experience for our customers so that they can focus more on building their team and less on trying to distinguish like who's good, who's not good. So yeah, we create the platform. Companies will be able to upload whatever jobs that they want. And then on the other side, talent can filter through those jobs and apply as they kind of see fit. And from there, the magic hopefully happens, and they start having those conversations and move through the interview process and get hired. So that's the vision. Very simple. It's not a new concept. There's been job boards since the beginning of the internet, I'm sure. But in the African context, what you'll find is that a lot of ideas that are already kind of tried and tested aren't actually tried and tested here. And so we want to bring the kind of private job board to Africa and provide that platform for people.
I really love that you are starting exclusively with Africa. I think that is the key. So many times when we see like on Upwork, people from all over the world are applying and it's leaving out so many people, and also people who can't read like in English, for example, whatever language these jobs are being posted. And I assume, is it English for your website? Is
Yes.
everything
Yeah,
available only in English?
we're focusing on English. I mean, the two major like international languages of the continent are English and French. So very quickly, and my co-founder is actually French as well. So very quickly, we will look at bringing on potential francophone clients who are looking for French-speaking talent or bilingual talent. But for right now, we're launching with English.
That's fantastic. So, what would you say are the advantages of working in Africa remotely compared to other parts of the world?
Yeah. So there's a lot of advantages. I mean, the thing that kind of comes to mind very quickly is it actually has nothing to do with work, but the experience outside of work. I think when you're working remotely, you do have that freedom. And the mistake that a lot of people make is the fact that they know they're free and they just assume that the experience will therefore be liberating and they'll end up doing a lot of things outside of just working. But it requires effort. You have to be deliberate and intentional about the type of experience, the type of remote work experience you have. You have to plan, you have to like decide that you're going to do things. Otherwise, what happens to a lot of people is unfortunately they end up creating their own prison of freedom, where yes, they technically could do anything, but they end up spending like 10, 12 hours a day, 5 days a week inside their Airbnb. You know, and it's like you might as well be back home because you're actually not experiencing the place and the people and the culture. What I found here is that it's not as easy to do that because you're in such a unique and really inspiring place. It's so different from a lot of the rest of the world that just by virtue of where you are kind of pulled into things outside of work that are really fulfilling in a different way than the work itself. You kind of alluded to this earlier about how warm and friendly the people in Ghana were. That's one part of it, is the actual people, and the relationship that the people have to foreigners and to tourists, but then also the actual geography, things like safari and animals that you can't really find in many different parts of the world. It's so unique that while you're there, you want to experience it and see it and feel it. And then even the food too, those are all things that really kind of take you out of this, oh, I'm gonna work, I have to work, into like, no, actually, like I am experiencing the world, and it's more of an experience than just working. So that's one thing, but that's the biggest thing that kind of comes to mind that I would say is a huge advantage.
Oh, those are great advantages. And I have this feeling too, and you may correct me if I'm wrong, that a lot more of Africa is like they're just used to like being outside and interacting with people, and even like hanging out outside, and like, if it's at a restaurant with outdoor seating, things like that. And when I was in Ghana, I could say that I was always hearing music everywhere, and I just like
Mhm.
feel the energy from that. And it was and the dance, and a lot of dancing as well. We were involved in some of that when we were there, and it just gives you, like you said, so much more energy than like just like being in the prison, like you said, inside all the time.
Yeah, yeah, I would say for sure. It's very more community focused, I think is the phrase I like to use versus, I mean, for me personally, coming from the US, very individualistic society and culture, which prioritizes the individual over community. Whereas here it's about everyone together. And that lends itself to, yes, being outside, being in spaces where you can commune, music, things that you can do with other people. And I think that's a great difference. Of course, at times, sometimes that's really annoying when maybe when you want to be alone, or you want to do something by yourself, or you don't want to share something. But there's pros and cons to everything. So I one thing I value is getting the fullness of life and experiencing everything that different cultures have to offer. So it is nice sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Yeah.
I would say, like, do you know of any, if people want to tap in and go to Africa, do you know of any like remote working conferences they could start with, that where if we're considering going, we can tap into the industry there?
Fortunate enough to don't know any conferences that are actively like here on the continent. I do, like I said, Cap Verde or Cabo Verde, depending on how, if you use the Portuguese or the English spelling, they do have like a remote working program, and I think that's a great resource to be able to, yeah, they are definitely like the source of remote work here on the continent, and they're like definitely aware of spaces and places where you can like tap into the kind of broader community. But I will say, compared to other parts of the world, like Europe, of course, even like parts of Latin America, it's definitely earlier. So meaning it's not as established and developed, and I'm not aware of any like conferences, which is also exciting because that means that there's a huge opportunity for someone who wants to come in and actually start those things. And I do think they'll find that it'll end up being really successful because it's still a secret here. There are people working remotely and digital nomads, but it's just not as loud, I guess I would say, as Europe or Latin America and places like that. Asia, of course, too.
Right. So let's say I wanted to come into Kigali, Rwanda first. How would you recommend that I tap into the community once let's say I get an Airbnb and I stay there, and then I find the co-working space you mentioned? What's the
Uh-huh.
best way to start to find events or connect with the community to balance my
Yeah, I mean,
my work and my play?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely you have to be a little bit more creative. And it's like for me personally, LinkedIn is a huge tool that I use. I post actively on LinkedIn several times a week. And I also am connecting with people and having those conversations in the DMs. So that is a huge resource, just sharing the fact that you are in Kigali, if that's the country or the city, wherever you are, sharing and kind of, okay, sharing and kind of broadcasting that and yeah, actively trying to connect and network with people who are there. Otherwise, I found really great resources like Facebook. So expat Facebook groups, every city and country has those. So joining those groups, connecting with people there, seeing what's going on, you'll find a lot of people that are working remotely. They post and ask questions in those types of expat groups or nomad groups. Um, yeah, I would say those are probably the two best resources. Otherwise, sometimes I tend not to do that because I want to connect more with locals versus, like, oh, I'm an expat, I'm here working remotely. That's fine. But a lot of times for me, it's like I definitely also want to like get involved with people who are working locally. And again, for that, LinkedIn is a huge way. Like I find other professionals that are working at local companies and startups and connect with them and try to meet up for coffee. And one thing leads to another, and they invite me to some kind of like party or a gathering. And from there, you just kind of build your network brick by brick.
Right. How do you spend your time when you're in Dakar in Senegal? What do you do for fun there when you're not working?
Yeah, recently it's through work, so it's like I'm never not working. But normally when things are a little bit easier than they are right now, the car is surrounded by water on three sides, so it's very much about the ocean. Everything is oceanfront. There's oceanfront restaurants, bars, clubs. If you're into that kind of scene, I do enjoy that, like going out. There's a few great restaurants that I like a lot, and there's also some really great pools that are like right in front of the ocean. So you can kind of be in the swimming pool, watch the sunset. There's live music a lot of times or DJs who are playing music. And it's really great vibe and like kind of nightlife scene or day life. So that's really good. Other than that, I think just nature as well. Just the other day I went kayaking. They have here basically the ocean kind of jets into the country and creates these like saltwater rivers throughout Senegal, and they have mangrove trees and like a lot of nature and wildlife, like some monkeys and different animals that you don't normally see. So I went kayaking the other day, and that was really cool. The beach, of course, is always an option. So actually, like going swimming, surfing is actually pretty popular, especially in Dakar. There's a couple surf camps and a lot of places to catch some good waves. I don't surf, but if that's something you're into, that's always definitely an option. Um, they have so one place that is really cool is called Lac Rose, which is the pink lake. It's I think it's one of the largest pink lakes in the world. That is like very pink due to the salt content of the water. So it's a great place to like kind of walk around, um, view, like there's a lot of birds there. And then they have like this really virgin beach that you can rent four-wheelers, kind of ride along the beach in front of the ocean. And there's like nobody out there. So it's like things like that. There's a lot of nature and things that you can do that is pretty unique to Senegal.
Sounds absolutely beautiful. Okay, my last question for people that might be thinking about this, and it is worth the research, I know. What is your visa situation to get into Senegal or Rwanda? How long do you happen to know how long you can be on a visa once you enter a
Yeah.
country? I know there's a lot of countries in Africa, but generally speaking.
Yeah. 54 countries. I mean, it does vary, but I would say in general, if we're talking about a Western passport, with the kind of the on par with the US or the UK or France or something like that, the standard like kind of tourist visa is 90 day, um, but very easy to get extensions if you're kind of also. And my experience is that the countries aren't so particular Like if I'm gonna come here and I know I'm gonna do some tourism, like I plan on going to do a safari or I'm going to be visiting the Pink Lake, and I'm also going to be working. I know I've heard stories of some countries that are very strict. If you bring a laptop, you need to file for a different visa. It's not like that at all here. Very casual, and so it's very easy also to extend. So if you start with 90 and you realize, actually, I really like this and I want to stay longer, very flexible and easy to kind of extend that visa. Otherwise, if you plan on staying as long as I have, it's also very easy, at least here in Senegal, to become a resident. So I am a legal resident here in Senegal. When I was in Rwanda, they had, again, very easy to extend the visa. And also, there are a lot of countries that are working on like digital nomad visas and things like that, which will allow you to stay much longer. So there's options. You definitely have to do your research because there are so many different countries and it can vary. But generally speaking, there's a lot of visa on arrival based on the strength of your passport. And you don't have to do much work in advance. You kind of just show up, they check your passport out, you can ask some questions, they stamp you, and you're allowed to enter the country.
Yeah, I think it's just like you said, we're all from different countries coming in. So definitely do your research because I've found Africa generally to be behind in terms of the visa on arrivals across the board, but there are plenty of countries, like you said, that let you right in. It just depends where
Yes,
you're from. So don't forget that part of your research when you are thinking of coming to Africa to work remotely.
for sure. Absolutely. That's a good point.
Well, Wei, do you have anything else that you would like to share with us before you go today?
No, is it okay to shout out a couple things? Is that fine?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so just if anyone just interested in like more remote work here on the continent or what we're trying to build at my company internally, the best place to reach me is just going to be on LinkedIn. I'm assuming you can put maybe the link to that in the description or in the show notes if this is going to be audio. But yeah, you can just connect with me on LinkedIn, and that's the fastest place to get a response from me.
Thank you. So, any other social channels or social media that you want to promote?
Nope, that would be the main one, just LinkedIn. And I mean, also I'm active on TikTok, if you're into that kind of thing. So you can follow me at Weh'yee. That's just my first name and then BA.
Great. Yeah. And we'll put the link to that in the description as well. Well, Wei,
Cool.
thank you so much for joining us and shedding some light on a part of the world that I know a lot of remote workers are not taking advantage of yet and enjoying all that nature, for example, that you mentioned. It's incredible. So many opportunities in Africa. It's such a beautiful place. Thank you so much for joining me today.
All right. Thank you, Becky. It was a pleasure.
Yes, thank you.